In the world of diplomacy, sometimes the country that doesn't act is the one making the biggest statement. And today, that's what we're unpacking. Italy's high-stakes standoff on recognizing Palestine. While its closest allies were moving forward, this key G7 nation found itself in a real bind, caught between its history, massive protests, and a stunning shift on the world stage. And then came this, a bombshell statement. For Giorgia Meloni, the leader of a government that has been a staunch ally of Israel, to use the word massacre, well, those are incredibly powerful words. It signaled a huge political shift and really set the stage for a dramatic confrontation, both inside Italy and on the global stage. Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the global wave of recognition that was building. Then, we'll dive into Italy's pretty unique history on this issue. From there, we'll get into Meloni's two specific conditions, the massive pressure from the streets, that key moment at the UN, and finally, what this all means for everyone else. So first, let's set the scene. The period from 2024 into 2025 saw this massive diplomatic shift. In response to the ongoing crisis in Gaza, more and more Western nations started to formally recognize Palestine. This created a powerful international current, and Italy found itself trying to swim against it. And just look at how fast this all happened. It started with a few countries in the spring of 2024. But by September of the next year, you have major powers like the UK, Canada, and France all joining in. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a coordinated diplomatic push that left the holdouts, like Italy, looking more and more isolated. So why was Italy so hesitant? To really get that, you have to look at its history. Because unlike a lot of its allies, Italy's foreign policy on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has not been a straight line at all. It's actually swung pretty dramatically over the years. And this shift is just stark. During its First Republic, Italy tried to maintain what it called supportive equidistance, basically a balanced approach. They even recognized the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO. But then, after a bunch of political chaos around 1994, Italy's Second Republic was born, and the policy did a complete 180. It became one of Israel's strongest European allies, and that's the position Meloni's government came from. So, with that pro-Israel history as the backdrop, how did Meloni deal with all this pressure? Well, she didn't just say no to recognition. Instead, she laid out two very specific, non-negotiable conditions. And here they are, plain and simple. First, the release of all Israeli hostages. Second, a guarantee that Hamas would have zero role in any future Palestinian government. You see, her argument was that the international community should be pressuring Hamas, who she said started and prolonged the war, not Israel. For her, these two things had to happen before a conversation about statehood could even begin. But that hardline stance, it lit a fuse back home. While the government was holding its position, the streets of Italy just erupted in protest. It revealed this deep and at times violent division within the country over its own foreign policy. The government's response was sharp. No minced words here. Meloni called the protesters thugs and condemned what she called gratuitous violence and destruction. It made it crystal clear that there was zero sympathy for their cause at the very top. And we're not talking about a few isolated incidents here. Protests broke out in 75 different cities. The scale was just massive. It was a coordinated, nationwide explosion of public anger. And things got really intense. These weren't exactly peaceful marches. Over 60 police officers were injured in the clashes, which just shows you how confrontational and volatile the situation on the ground had become. Milan was especially chaotic, so much so that headlines started describing the city as burning. You had protesters smashing windows at the central train station, throwing smoke bombs and battling with riot police, who were firing back with tear gas and water cannons. It was just chaos. The thing is, the protesters' demands went way beyond just symbolic recognition. They wanted a complete stop to all military cooperation with Israel, a block on any arms being transferred through Italian ports, and a huge increase in aid for Gaza. This was a call for a total, fundamental reversal of Italian foreign policy. So you've got this tidal wave of international diplomatic pressure on one side and explosive unrest at home on the other. Something had to give, and it did, on the world's biggest stage, the UN General Assembly, where Meloni's tone suddenly and dramatically changed. But here's the twist. Even as she was delivering that sharp criticism about a massacre among civilians, she was very careful to balance it. She made sure to say that Hamas started the war and could end it by releasing the hostages. It created this really complex, almost contradictory position, condemning Israel's actions but still pointing the finger at Hamas as the primary culprit. And we can't forget that behind all this political maneuvering, there is a devastating human toll. These numbers really frame the entire debate. The conflict kicked off with the October 7th attacks, where nearly 1,200 Israelis were killed and around 250 were taken hostage. In the war that followed, health authorities in Gaza have reported that over 65,000 Palestinians have been killed. That is the grim reality behind all of the diplomacy. So why does Italy's stance matter so much to the rest of the world? Well, because its shifting position has the potential to create ripple effects far beyond its own borders, especially inside the European Union and for the wider conflict itself. This is where it gets absolutely crucial for everyone. See, for the EU to pass sanctions, it needs what's called a qualified majority. That's 55% of the member countries representing 65% of the total population. For a long time, Italy and Germany were the key votes blocking sanctions against Israel. But if Meloni's Italy flips from a hard no to a yes or even an abstention, it could become the single swing vote that tips the entire balance of EU policy. And this really gets to the heart of the whole conflict. For the Palestinians and their allies, recognition isn't the end of the road. It's a necessary step towards peace that strengthens their diplomatic hand in future talks. But for the Israeli government, it's seen as an absurd prize for terrorism that rewards violence and blows up the idea of direct negotiations. These two worldviews are just fundamentally at odds. Which brings us right to our final question. Is this new policy from Giorgia Meloni, this idea of conditional recognition, a smart, pragmatic path to peace? Or is it really just a political maneuver to kick the can down the road, delaying a real decision and keeping in place a dangerous and unsustainable status quo? That's the big question now facing Italy, Europe, and the rest of the world.